Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. And well, first of all, before I say anything else, I should say congratulations, Richard Parker of Altitude Angel, on your the investment in your company. That's fantastic. I did raise a glass for you last week whilst you were partying. I hope that party went well.
Yeah, it was great. It's been a busy couple of months while we get that closed, but I can certainly tell you there are more than a few glasses raised here in celebration.
That's very cool. And I have just finished, I know Richard did, but Bruce couldn't care because that's what they're like in New Zealand. Couldn't care less. Just watched the Falcon Heavy take off and wow. Just wow, wow, wow. And particularly wow on that formation landing of the boosters. That was extraordinary. Absolutely straight out of Star Wars and Dan Dare and all those other great things that that I grew up with. I'm amazed. And there's your autonomous vehicles for you. Because as I say, that goes with a click of a mouse, doesn't it, all of that? Yes, very just cool. Nodding of heads, nodding of
very
heads.
Cool. We believe you.
We believe. I believe. What did you say we were going to be called this evening, Bruce?
What's that?
What was the three of us? Richard said Axis of Power.
Boring as bat poo.
Boring as bat poo. That's it. That's it. That's what it's going to be. And just before we start,
I don't think we should make Bruce in charge of marketing.
well, but at least if you hang a hat on somebody, then it gives them roles and responsibilities, and we can have a go at him if the marketing campaign fails. If we don't have a head of marketing, then who are we going to blame? So I like the idea of being able to blame Bruce. Personally, I think it's the way forward. Tesla, space junk, whatever next. Yes, indeed, space junk, indeed. They can't, and I love the words "don't panic" coming up on the screen on the radio. I thought that was fantastic, and I love that the next one's got 42 engines and is going to be called whatever that ship is from Hitchhikers. I've forgotten the name of it now. Anyway, enough of that. So before we started, you said, Bruce, that you think it's going to start getting quiet in the industry.
Yeah, I've seen this in a lot of industries as they've matured, because I was sort of quite involved in the computer industry when it started, like microcomputers, and the internet industry. And I've seen for the first few years, there's this massive, you can't keep up with the press releases and the news stories and the breakthroughs, and it's all very exciting. And there are 1,000,001 different websites all reporting the information, and it's a real buzz. And then things start to mature, and it becomes like, I don't know, the car industry. There's product releases and things, but there's nothing wildly exciting. And so it all sort of calms down a bit and becomes the domain of men in suits. And the buzz goes out of it. And I think we're starting to almost see a little bit of that happening now with the UAV drone, what do you want to call it, industry, because we've reached a point where they've become a part of everyday life in many circles. And that's only going to become more and more so. And once the regulators, decide to stop having apoplectic fits over things that don't matter, we're going to end up with just another industry which just ticks along nicely and smoothly, and something else will come out of the woodwork, which will be the next big thing, and we'll all get excited about that. But the drones will become just a tool in our everyday lives.
No, I absolutely agree, and I'm hoping and I'm looking forward to that stage coming. I've been looking forward. SES News has been running for 10 years, and I've been looking forward to this moment for 10 years where the industry starts growing up. It needs to. And in fact, Tian, who also works at SES News, we were talking about it today, that if this stock market crash continues, we might see some dropping out of VC money and a little bit more realism. And I genuinely mean that. I hope we get some realism coming into everything, and that can only be good. And well, I'll bring it to the hype. I'm going to get the name wrong here, but the Airbus Vahana has flown this week, and I really wonder what is the point of all these optionally piloted air taxis, electric things, and are they really any better than a helicopter? It speaks perfectly to Richard's expertise, which is unmanned traffic management, because that's for sure what they're going to need. But I don't see the point of them. Do either of you see the point of these? Well, can you help me with the point of these vehicles?
Should we let Bruce go first, as the guy who probably wants them to burn horribly, and then I'll come in and go completely the other way?
Fair enough. Yes, if you must.
I think they're great. Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh,
over to you, Richard. Take the counterpoint, mate.
Yeah, now burn them, Richard.
Okay, burn all the drones.
Well, come on, we're waiting.
Okay, I'll go then. So I think personal air transport is really interesting, right? So if you look at what's typically happened with the cost of air travel, you look at all these attempts to make flying cars, and it's all incredibly expensive. It's all very difficult to do, and still requires a pilot. So I quite like the idea of being able to get my Uber Air app out in 5 or 10 years or whatever it's going to be, and then just zip straight across from A to B where I'm going. Of course, I don't want to be a pilot, and actually, if I go out on a Friday night, I want to go out and have a few drinks. I certainly don't want to fly drunk, so I want to have a vehicle that can safely take me from A to B. And if I can avoid all the congestion in Reading or London or New York or wherever that's going to be, then the better for it. But these things might be cheap to purchase relatively, but I think the operating costs of them, the cost to you and me to jump in them, it's going to be reserved for the few that can actually afford it initially. I don't see them being ubiquitous, certainly at launch.
And then they must fit into your airspace world, your UTMs, very, very nicely, because they're definitely going to need to be kept away from everything else.
I think there are lots of different ways for managing that risk, right? But I think one of the things we look at Altitude Angel is the kind of that everyone kind of thinks that stands for unmanned, but in our world, we think that stands for unified. It actually is the blending together of all things in the airspace. And actually, as you look further out to the future and you look at the future of air transport, the future of ground transport, then those two will need to meet at some point, hopefully in a nice, cohesive, synchronized, orchestrated way. But you need to be able to have a system that can provide that kind of safety management, that orchestration throughout the airspace. And that, I think, to some is called urban air mobility now. I think that's the latest phrase. But for us, it's more about that automation of all things manned and unmanned.
I wonder, Bruce, is there, as you say, markets mature, is there a process of, as Richard just mentioned, urban air mobility is the latest buzzword. Do we have to go through 10 iterations of buzzwords before a market exists? Is there a formula for the number of times it changes names until it grows?
Doesn't seem to be one, but this whole thing of, we've been sold this concept of you be able to, call up an app, something will arrive, you jump in, it'll fly you to where you want to go. I don't see this happening, to be totally honest. I mean, it's been promised since I started reading Popular Mechanics magazines way back in the 1950s or whenever it was. This whole personal aerial transport thing has always been promoted as the ultimate goal and something that's going to happen, but it's not. Because if you draw the analogy between the airspace and motor vehicles, we have roads. We drive on roads. You can't drive just across a paddock or across your neighbour's lawn. You have to stick to prescribed roads, and this is where traffic management comes in. So I don't see ever see the prospect of you being able to land in your backyard with your pilotless drone, with man-carrying vehicle, because for a start, the amount of disruption, the air, the noise, all that sort of stuff, it's just not going to happen. I mean, there are most towns you can't even, burp without getting a permit from the local council. So you're not going to be able to land a pilotless aircraft in your backyard or even on the street outside in front of your house, because it's just not going to fit into the way we have our society structured. So we're going to have point-to-point transport, yes, but it's not going to be from your home to where you want to go. It's going to be from a embarkation point to a debarkation point. And that's, pretty much it'd be like a bus rather than a car. So I don't see this whole thing of sort of making this totally personal transport in the air ever happening, no matter how much air traffic management we have, because once you get below 400 feet and you get into a built-up area, your neighbours are going to bitch and moan and grizzle. It just will not happen. Bureaucrats will come in and they'll wield the heavy sword, and you'll have to drive, and it'll be like the park and ride, where you drive to your nearest Air Uber thing and you park, and then you get a ride from there. So you're still going to have to walk the last mile home or drive drunkenly when you get back from the party. It's, I don't think people have thought this through too much.
I think there's definitely some logistics challenges associated with that future view that every one of us can have a flying car. But I think those problems will be solved gradually over time. And where you're likely to see these occurring are in dense urban environments, perhaps between skyscrapers, between rich folks who need to travel from one office to the next. Now, actually, in New York, there are companies already that do this between the East River and I think the other side of the other bank. And they fly in helicopters today across between their skyscrapers. So you imagine the cost of doing that comes down dramatically if they can get in an unmanned aircraft and do it. So, but I do agree with you. I don't think we're going to see certainly in the 10 to 15 year time frame, each and every one of us being able to do point to point in a case of, door to door. But then again, most transport has evolved in that way. It's aggregated around sort of mass transit links and aggregation points before it became very, very personal. But I think you go 40, 50 years out, is it unusual or to imagine a future where actually we don't drive around on tarmac anymore, but the predominant mechanism for transport is actually air travel? And to me, I think that becomes, the further out you go, the more obvious it becomes that that's a better way of transport, because for all the reasons you mentioned, we have to deal with things like congestion on the ground, and we have to go in a certain direction, and that's why certain routes always get congested. And the air offers us obviously a lot more opportunity to avoid that, because we can stack things on a third dimension, and we can't do that on the ground.
Yeah, we can, but as I say, the problem is unless you can come up with a way of actually leaving the ground and returning to the ground without displacing a huge amount of air and therefore creating all this turbulence and noise and things, that last 100 feet is going to be the hurdle that you have to overcome. It's going to be very difficult to do that if you're looking at operating in a suburban environment, at least.
I think there's definitely going to be the equivalent of the ASBO, rather, the antisocial behaviour order for flying vehicles. But I think, as we play out over time, I think you're going to see a change in propulsion technology. You're going to see a change in energy generation technology, and over time, it will make some of these challenges less of a challenge. But certainly today, with the kind of Airbus vehicle that we've seen, I don't think I'd want that landing on my street, let alone in my garden.
Well, you've got the perfect map behind you there. You've got the heli-routes map for London.
I have.
And you can, so I can see where your thinking is. But also I can see down on the bottom right-hand side, I can see Biggin Hill, and I can see the approach of that arrow pointing into Biggin. So there's a great subset of airspace that you're going to have to worry about. And you can also see the approach to London City on there, and to Heathrow itself. There's a lot of things to stay out of the way of. And I wonder if you were to put, let's just say 50 vehicles flying in that airspace along with the other stuff, what sort of chaos would ensue? Do you guys run any simulations of that sort of thing? I mean, have you thought about how it might work with current traffic?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we started doing very early on was trying to design a system that didn't operate purely in sort of what we called drone land. It had to be a realistic interpretation of what a busy, congested airspace would look like, where the predominant users of that airspace weren't unmanned vehicles, they were in fact manned vehicles. So we run, pretty much on a weekly basis, we run all sorts of engineering simulations to understand how our own traffic management algorithms perform. But when we want to introduce new concepts, for example, what happens in our simulations if we allow all drones to navigate their own path and maybe take the shortest distance from A to B, or where we start to introduce known entry and exit points. How does that work? What about if we start introducing capabilities into that mixture, where we look at certain aircraft can only go in a certain location at a certain time because of the way that they're built. Some aircraft can't hold, for example. They would have to hover. They have fixed wings. So we have simulation environments where we test a lot of this. But again, a lot of it will come down also to what does the law allow the company to do? What do we want as a society? For these vehicles that are flying around over our head. I mean, you go and talk to the folks that live under Heathrow's flight path, they'll have a very different view about the benefits of Heathrow than anyone that lives 30 miles away like me. But at the same time, it's easy to think about replicating what we do now in the airspace, in the unmanned world, or in the unmanned traffic management world, because we already understand that. We already understand that an airport typically has an arrival and a departure point. It would seem crazy, surely, today to have any vehicle able to approach from 360 degrees. But obviously, from a traffic management and a flow management perspective, that would make much more sense if you were able to make use of all the airspace around the facility you were trying to get to. So, yeah, I mean, we've done, I think you guys might have even covered it at some point, but we did some research last year that we culminated in with Microsoft and Imperial College London, where we had teams of engineers and teams of algorithmic experts creating algorithms for us that we would then test against real life scenarios, where we would give them very contrived and incredibly complex scenarios to navigate, and then in the middle of all their fantastically planned scenarios, introduce the flight of a helicopter, or introduce a sudden change to the airspace restrictions, and the algorithms were measured for their performance at managing that sudden change. And the winning team were able to come up with an algorithm that did that 100% of the time with a 0% collision rate. And I think that was over something like 20,000 iterations in a 10-minute period. So it was a very dense environment that we were using to stress test.
But that's with all the traffic complying instantaneously. And I mean, how many tracks was that?
That's a good point. We have what we call reactive and planned, essentially. Reactive for us is the predominant mechanism that most people tend to fly their drones in today. And in other words, the main distinction there is a reactive drone flight is something that we can see, either because someone appears on a sensor that we have, or because someone tells us they're operating in an area at a time, but doesn't do it in advance. So there's no kind of concept of a flight plan. Whereas the opposite of that is usually a professional users who do risk assessments. They might work out the waypoints of their flight. And actually, if you're going to go automated and beyond visual line of sight, you're definitely going to have a flight plan. So in our scenarios, we actually measured both. But the ones that we were more interested in initially, because anyone can create a computer algorithm that can deal with everything when it's all locked down, when you know where everything is going to be and when. It's a really simple problem to solve. But what's more interesting to us is what happens when actually we introduce a bunch of drones that are all trying to get to their own destination in a very small geographic area, but aren't given a route plan and aren't managed by the system. And simply the system operates in a mode where it kind of acts a little bit like a TCAS system, where it can reach out to each of the individual pilots and say, hey, turn left, you turn right, you ascend, you descend, and then measure whether people are doing it, and then react accordingly to whether you're doing it or not. And that was the effectiveness of the algorithms we were trying to look at.
So hang on, let Bruce jump in if I'm getting boring here, but help me understand this here, Richard. So I've got an algorithm on my aircraft, and I've got a unified method of communication between aircraft within a local area. And it says, hey, Dave, hey, Bruce, turn right, Dave, descend, or whatever. And if Dave or Bruce doesn't do what the group, and I guess then a whole lot of aircraft within an area, well, I'm going over the top of there, I'm going over there, I'm going, well, it'd be a good idea if you do this and I do that and do the other. And then as a gang, you could decide that one's not cooperating, so you could gang up and beat it up, go and fly it off into a corner somewhere. But so by doing that, then you work out who's cooperating and who's not, and then as soon as you know who's not cooperating, you take a different set of actions. Sorry, it was very long-winded. Is that where you're at?
Yeah, so it's a mixture for us of, first off today, the law in most countries around the world says that it's actually the pilot that has control of the vehicle, not a remote operator. So actually in our default mode of operation, the most practical mode of operation, we would have a telemetry feed from your drone, either coming directly from the software that you have on board your drone or your ground station, or in what we call, when you're operating under visual line of sight, we have just what we call a flight report, which is very simply, I'm at this location and here's a 500-meter bubble around me. Let's go for the former idea, where actually we have a connection to the pilot and we have a telemetry feed. Then as you fly around, Altitude Angel's monitoring the airspace and monitoring everything else that it can see, including manned aviation feeds in most locations. And then when we see a conflict that might occur, we tell the pilot about it. And that instruction is audited and it's executed online, and then it goes straight to the pilot's device, and we can see whether the pilot's doing it. We can't make the pilot do it, because obviously the pilot is the person who should know best. But then the system is able to then work out whether we've got a compliant person at the other end of the equation or we haven't. And anyone that works in air traffic will tell you air traffic management is not the elimination of risk in the airspace, it's the management of risk in the airspace. So our goal here is to say, well, actually, let's say we're managing Bruce, and Bruce is actually not complying with any instruction that he's given. He's on his collision course. That could be for all sorts of reasons, but let's just say Bruce is willfully disobeying every single instruction that he's given. It becomes very evident that we can't really do much about Bruce, but the 20 other pilots that we have operating nearby, they don't want to be impacted by what Bruce is up to. So we can start to mitigate the risk further in the airspace by warning other people. And that's actually the default mode of operation that we have right now in our engineering setup, is it starts to manage the risk around you by, if you imagine everyone starts out with tiny little bubbles of exclusion around them, but actually the riskier you become, the bigger that bubble becomes. And that's a very it's a drastic oversimplification, but that's essentially what's happening. Now, if you go forward a couple of years, or maybe even in certain areas where you have test regulations that allow you to go BVLOS, or at least allow a remote service to take control of the aircraft, then we can operate in one of two modes. So the first mode is we operate a little bit like a TCAS, where we tell you about a collision and we give you a timeout. And if you don't do if you don't acknowledge or reject our request within a certain time, then we do the thing we're telling you we're going to do. And then we have what we call kind of like risk bands. So let's imagine I'm going to give you some arbitrary figures just for easy numbers, but let's say you're 10 miles from Heathrow. We might warn you that you're on the approach to Heathrow. You need to be really careful. When you get to 5 miles, we're going to say, look, you should really stop now. But when you get to 1 mile, we might actually at that point be able to reach into your drone and put it into a hover or get it to come back to you. But again, this is still this is the political part of the system. It's the procedural, the regulatory part, which is working out what can we do, what should we do, what's the least invasive action that we can take to avoid the situation that is likely to occur. And ultimately, what do we communicate to you as the person or the company that runs the drone about the characteristics and the behaviors of our system? Because one of the things we have to do is make sure that it's completely deterministic. And that brings me on to another buzzword called AI, which would be a really interesting one for you to ask me about in a minute.
I don't want to know about artificial insemination.
Don't do it, Gary. Don't ask him. Don't ask him.
I know exactly. Is this some sort of mind control trick, Bruce? Is that what AI is all about?
He knows. Well, he knows exactly what I would do in those situations. Not respond to commands. How does he know this? But it sounds like
we actually have a system that emulates Bruce, and it's called Bruce.
It's called Bruce.
But obviously, this is a really adaptive system, which is kind of cool because it then takes into account the exceptions rather than the rules, which is very important because it's the exceptions that kill you, not the rules. I want to know what happens, Richard, and is there a fallback scenario here? Let's say we have a solar storm and GPS is affected. So suddenly you've got all these craft which can't accurately report their position. Or you have I presume the telemetry will come back via 5G networks or something. If the 5G network goes down, what are the fallback positions? I mean, ultimately, you have a man standing on a tower with some flags or flashy lights for manned aircraft. What happens with the AirAngel thing? And when the infrastructure fails because we've got this massive coronal mass ejection, do you have a fallback position?
So I think we tend to put a ring around the operation of the system and separate that from what we call last mile, which is actually probably not the right characterization for it, but essentially it's the transport. How does telemetry arrive at Altitude Angel and how does it go out? And the reason for that is when you deploy infrastructure into the aviation environment, it typically is around for decades, which means any technology we deploy has to last a long time and will probably outlive a lot of different communications technologies in the interim. Now, obviously, when it comes to a system like Altitude Angel, people say, well, what happens if GPS goes down, or what happens if 5G or 4G or 3G goes down? And those are all perfectly valid questions. But actually, the real question we should be asking here is, what are the requirements for flying a particular type of mission in a particular location? For example, should you, Bruce, as a commercial drone pilot, if you just want to go and fly your drone in your backyard, should you have any requirements on you whatsoever, perhaps other than registration? In other words, what I'm talking about here is, should you have to connect to a UTM? Should you have to have 3G, 4G, 5G on your phone? Should you have to have good GPS? Those are questions that, actually, ourselves and other companies around the world are participating in, with the FAA in the US and in Europe with the US Space Program. And broadly speaking, what we're trying to advocate for is something called capability levels, which basically says, look, if you want to fly a 150 kilogram unmanned drone at Heathrow Airport, then you need to have a system which has multiple redundancies, it has multiple transports, and it will have different mechanisms for identifying its position. But actually, if you want to fly a 3 kilogram I don't know, insert generic Chinese manufactured drone name here, and you want to do that for fun, and you want to do that 20 miles away from any airport, you might have very different requirements that are on you. So one of the things that our system does do, however, is it looks at the track record of the thing that's talking to us to work out whether that thing is currently experiencing a problem. So putting that in real terms, let's say we've got a great connection to you while you're flying around in some controlled airspace somewhere, and we're getting a location ping from Bruce's drone, once every second, which is kind of ideal for us. But actually, after 10 minutes of great flight of getting, 1 ping per second, you go down to 1 ping every minute. Now, that's something that our system will manage, and it tracks that as a variable, and it will say, hey, maybe I need to start doing something about the instructions that I give Bruce, because now I can't reach him so quickly. The distance that he could travel in that time is actually greater, so I need to give him different instructions. And then we wait for you to acknowledge those. And if the acknowledgement time goes up as well, then we start to push that warning out to other people in the area. So the algorithm's kind of adaptive. And I think, the position one is really interesting because, as a software company, it strikes me that we get asked this a lot, but actually it's not really down to us to create a system that will ubiquitously and reliably always function. This is the hardware manufacturer's goal, to come up with position information. But what we do have a responsibility to do is verify that the information we're getting is actually accurate. And that's because, we have to, when we design things at Altitude Angel, we design things from a position almost of not trusting anything that's coming into the system. We have an open API, it's very secure, but that doesn't mean that just because you've authenticated and you've gone through all the security that you're not going to send us really dodgy data. So we have obvious checks that go in there. You can't teleport across the network, for example. You can't exceed the physical boundaries of physics. You can't have a drone that travels at the speed of light, for example. These are all fairly contrived but obvious things that we do to kind of filter and check what's coming in. And the final one is, we are talking here about cooperative drones, but actually probably to fly in very sensitive areas, you're going to need to have other systems in place which can track uncooperative drones or can verify a cooperative drone's position in space. A very simple example there would be, let's say you're flying a nice, 100-kilogram cargo drone around not too far away from an airport, and you're visible to radar, and you're also sending your telemetry to Altitude Angel. Then we combine those two sources together, and because we can verify your position independently of your position and they both match, that has a slightly higher rating in our system. And that therefore means that we can kind of trust the data you're sending us for that duration for a little longer than we would otherwise be able to do it. So I think it's like a layered approach, right? The more complicated the mission, the higher the risk, the more difficult an environment you want to work within, then actually probably the greater the requirements on you as the operator should be, or rather of your equipment as well, in order to do that mission successfully. And I think that's probably in line with the kind of general public's expectations, right? They don't want anyone to just be able to stick a drone into the air and fly it right across, their back garden, and they could be 25 miles away. They probably want some assurances that if you're going to do, no human in the loop flying, that actually your airframe is certified to do that. I'll probably stop talking.
Is one thing going to have to change, and that is, at the moment, the definition of a near miss means if an airline pilot sees a drone 2 kilometers away, it's a near miss. Are we going to have pilots and things going to have to get used to flying in closer proximity to unmanned craft, or are we going to have to tighten up the definition of a near miss to, instead of several hundred meters, maybe 10 meters or something? Because we're going to have a congested airspace, and traffic management is going to set obviously boundaries of exclusion around each individual craft. But will that sort of sphere of exclusion become smaller and smaller as we get more congested and then management systems get better and better?
I think as capability improves overall, and capability of tracking of general aviation first and foremost, but also reliability of tracking systems for drones improves. And over time, I think you can make the case that actually that would be a logical conclusion, right? If you start out, say, with 5 mile or 3 nautical mile exclusion zones around everything, then eventually you're going to hit a capacity limit. And actually, there's probably at that point a good technological reason and a safety case for being able to reduce those. Do I think it needs to be 10 meters? Probably not. But then we're reminded of, a lot of the drone operators that we work with want to fly swarms. So there's also the fact that actually the drone operator probably has to be compliant with these new aviation laws as well. And the definition of a near miss for them might actually not be a near miss at all, because they're flying, 100 drones a meter away from each other. So I think, you're right. These are exactly the types of questions that are going to be posed by all of these kind of emerging trends. But I think overall, go and look out your window today. I mean, I'm in Reading here in the UK, which is not too far from Heathrow, one of the busiest airports in the world. And when I look up in the sky, it's not exactly crowded, right? And what I'm saying there is, there are thousands of aircraft in the sky at any one time in the UK, but it doesn't really encroach on my personal privacy. It doesn't really encroach on my impact today. In other words, there are more of those things flying around today than there are autonomous drones flying around today. And when those two start to equalize, that's when I think there's going to be an increasing pressure on working out what happens next. But I think certainly initially, anything that's flying around with people on board it should, in my personal view, have a much higher priority in the airspace over anything that doesn't, because you by definition, you've got skin in the game. You need to look after those folks. So I think we're going to see probably a definite skew towards making sure that unmanned vehicles remain whatever the regulator decides is an appropriate safe distance from a manned vehicle. And I think it's going to be necessary to have, almost like Asimov's laws built into drones to say, well, thou shalt not cross within 1 mile of a manned aircraft. I think that's how you're going to get these technologies certified for use.
Well, it sort of leads very nicely. Sorry, Bruce, after you.
It's going to be very interesting when we have that rapid transition from manned to unmanned flight, not talking about passenger jets, but for cargo carrying, all the things now where we have people skin in the game unnecessarily because we're only transporting goods. Once we get the skin out of that game, I think we'll see a dramatic change in the ratio of manned to unmanned flying. And then, of course, we will have a safer skies in theory, because the fewer people you've got up there, the fewer people are likely to get killed. So it'll be interesting to see how that skews these priorities at that stage of whether because sort of manned aviation may become such a small subset of total aviation, whether they just get a little area to operate in, and the rest of it's for unmanned.
Great. I see, Richard, you've picked up on the comments. Greg's about sources and spoofing data, and let's see if Greg comes back with that. And where I was going to say this was leading me on my mind. Was it leading me anywhere? I don't know. It was leading me to thinking about this incident in Las Vegas. With the racing drone, and that leads me on to electronics conspicuity, and everything should have it. And people are saying, well, that wasn't a DJI drone, so they're not going to be able to track it down like they did the fellow in New York that hit the Black Hawk. But it is still making a noise. It's making a radio noise. It's probably even making, and Bruce can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I bet the speed controller's got a digital signature. I bet the motors has got a digital signature. I bet if you listened out for the right noise, you could work out sort of what sort of type it was and that sort of a thing. What's your feeling on electronic conspicuity, Richard?
What's my feeling? I think it's necessary for anything in the airspace to be visible and trackable. But I also think that that's commensurate with the risk as well. So a good example there would be, do I think that, let's just pick on DJI because everyone knows who they are. Do I think every DJI Phantom 4 needs to be trackable all the time? No. Do I think we need to stick ADS-B transponders on every drone everywhere all the time? No. And the simple fact of the matter is, I mean, do we care about most of those drones? And the answer is probably no. But we do care in certain places. First and foremost, that's the easy ones, isn't it? I mean, do we want lots of recreational hobbyist drones flying around a power station? Probably not. What about an airport? Definitely not. So in those locations, I'd say conspicuity becomes a much more important part of the conversation. But then equally, we also have to think about safeguarding manned aviation. And actually not all manned aviation carries kind of electronic conspicuity equipment either. So I think there's definitely a need on both sides to step up a little bit and be more identifiable. And I just think that's gonna require a little bit of a regulatory nudge to say, where is it going to be required for you to have a certain method of conspicuity, and where is it not going to be? I think lastly, the last thing I want to add in there is, do I think ADS-B is the most appropriate mechanism for drones? And I'm going to say no. I don't even think it's the most appropriate mechanism for aircraft. No. But
no, exactly.
I mean, we talk about cybersecurity and the importance of security and being cryptographically safe, and then we go and suggest things like, for a modern future air transportation system, we talk about using ADSB and giving every drone an ADSB transponder, and it's not secure, it's not encrypted in any way, shape, or form, and it's certainly not scalable. So I think there are better technologies. And I think there are very lightweight things we can do today that don't require add-on equipment, that already use the systems that are available. And yes, they're fallible in some respects because they'll rely on things like cell phone signals. But actually, having a system which is fallible maybe 10% of the time is better than having no system 100% of the time. And I think that's what the overall, as again, coming back to that point I made, it's not about eliminating risk in the airspace. It's about managing it. And actually, it's easier to manage if you can see more of the things in the air.
Yeah, no, ADSB looked great in 1990 when they started talking about it. It doesn't look quite so great now. Yeah, from a nerdy aviation point of view, I love ADSB. I can see airplanes coming by and go and take their registrations and all those sort of things. It's great. It's an interesting sort of stepping stone, isn't it? But when ADSB came along, there weren't this smartphone can do far more. I mean, put this in an aeroplane. I've got a moving map. I've got a way of telling a UTM where I am. I've got it could go on and on and on. And people are hitching their wagons to ADSB, and I think it is very foolish. As you say, it's not scalable. Now, I see Greg's mentioned the DJI spoofing. So that would be, and that's exactly something, funny enough, you can do with the ADSB, because you can do it with
DVB tuners.
Yeah, but you can inject traffic using X-Plane, as long as you get in a proper, and that's what people do. They inject traffic using X-Plane, or have, also I've been told. So spoofing and putting false tracks up. I guess he's asking, what does your system do to look for that sort of thing?
So I think it really is important to make a distinction between what happens on the hardware platform and what happens when it's observed centrally. Regardless of the platform that's talking to Altitude Angel, none of those guys can influence how we store the data, how we handle that data, and how we secure it. For example, it is completely impossible for even an Altitude Angel employee to modify a drone track once it's been received. It's cryptographically impossible for us to do that. Second aspect is, probably on Greg's point, it's really one more about validation. Like, how do we know that the data we're getting is trustworthy data? And if we start out by assuming that the data we get is trustworthy, we'll foul right at the first hurdle, right? So even anyone that works in enterprise IT will also say, actually, if you have an open system that folks can use, then by definition you have essentially an insecure system, and you should start your system design by working out how do you manage that risk. So there are lots of checks and lots of balances that we put in place to see whether or not the track is valid. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's real. And this comes back to the point I made about being able to corroborate the information we're getting from a drone with information that we can observe in that area from a trusted source. And the simple fact of the matter is, actually, if we have a hobbyist flyer sending us telemetry, while that's great, it's not something we could say is trusted, because it could easily be hacked. And actually, that some of that is down to the system manufacturer and the security controls that they have, and some manufacturers are better than others at doing that, but I'd say there's still room for improvement right across the board there. And a lot of it is dependent upon us at Altitude Angel to then overlay additional sources of data. So let's say that you're flying around a prison, and that prison is running localized sensors which can detect incoming drone traffic. Then that drone traffic to us essentially just becomes an anonymous data point. If you imagine you've got a point on the ground that represents the middle of the prison, and you've got a little sphere around you where you can detect everything coming in, then if you only can see that, then all you can see are the fact that there are some drones near you, but you can't see who they are or what they are. But if we also have a cooperative drone nearby in that sphere that's also telling us that it's in the same location, we can observe it, then we can put the two together and say, actually, there's a pretty good chance now that we can elevate the trust on this drone, because we can now verify that there is indeed something in the location that thing is purporting to be in, and therefore we can trust that data point a bit more. But that's not something that we that we take lightly, and it's not something that we do once. We don't kind of just see if we can verify it one time with Bruce, for example, and say, great, we've been able to corroborate one ping from Bruce, therefore he's a trusted pilot. It happens every single time that we get a new movement in the airspace. And every time we get a data point, it gets cryptographically secured and audited and filed against the flight number. So it can't be tampered with once it's reached us. Where it becomes really interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Well, I was just saying that's a bit like a primary radar return. You'd say turn right for identification, make your heading, whatever. So you could then, if you have that sort of imported source from your prison or whatever, because of course there could be a good guy and a bad actor both in the same bit of sky. I assume until you have identified or made the match that you'd be treating the ground sensor track as non-cooperative and be turning your other track against it.
Yeah, what we have to do is figure out what are the edge cases and how do we defend against them, and what are the appropriate mitigations. I mean, a lot of the time we're pushing the boundaries around what should happen if X, Y, and Z should occur in the airspace from an unmanned traffic perspective. And we also have to deal with the fact that unlike most manned aviation, we have to contend with the fact that we might not be able to talk to the remote pilot at all. We might not know who that remote pilot is at all. And actually that's made worse if we don't have any kind of electronic conspicuity at all, because essentially all we can do is say there's a thing in the sky, but we don't know what it is, or even, it might not even be a drone. A lot of these drone detection systems pick up birds quite readily. So, it really becomes, going back to Greg's core of his question, I think it comes out of something which is called defense in depth, which is making sure you've got multiple layers of security on the way into Altitude Angel. It becomes about being able to guarantee that the data you've got can't be changed or edited. And there are lots of mechanisms that we employ for doing that don't rely on kind of like a single cryptographic key for the kingdom. Every single data track, every single flight has different set of keys, different set of purposes associated with that. And then finally, becomes about being skeptical. That's one of the things all of our engineers have, is we are quite skeptical about the data that we receive and what we observe in the airspace. And I think that's really the only way that you can design or even start to think about designing a competent kind of UTM system. But are we there yet? No, we're not there. And I don't think anyone is there in the world with a competent, fully autonomous, certifiable UTM system. But I think we're definitely pushing the boundaries, pushing the curve out of it.
Well, this is turning into an Altitude Angel chat, but I think it's quite interesting.
But did it answer Greg's question? I just want to check. Greg, if you just let us know if it answered your question. If it didn't, I'll try and rephrase.
That's very good. So what I'm thinking, I'll tell you where my head's going with this now. My head's going, well, hang on a minute, you're building a system that's potentially much better than the current air traffic control system if you pull all that traffic in as well. So when you go to the regulator, are you having to make your system better than or equal to the current manned aviation standard, or are you going in with something that's kind of, well, it's kind of better than that? I can already see it's going to be better than that.
So I think we are kind of gluttons for pain. I mean, there's no legal or regulatory requirement on a UTM company today to have a system certified to the kind of the appropriate standards that you would find in air traffic control or in avionics equipment, for example. But we're actually designing our systems now in such a way that enables us to apply for those relevant certifications as the regulators work out what those are. So in some instances, we've been able to carve out chunks of our infrastructure and our end-to-end solution and say, right, let's go sit down and try and figure out if we can get this certified for these types of use cases. And it's a really lengthy, challenging, costly, expensive process. And it's costly and expensive in terms of time and in terms of money. So it's like the worst kind of expense that you can possibly incur. And at the end of it, you might end up with the realization that that's not appropriate at all. And we've reached this stage with a couple of regulators around the world where we've said, okay, this isn't really fit for purpose. The system you're asking us to certify ourselves against isn't really fit for the purpose that we're proposing here. So we really ought to come up with some kind of new standard, because this is very quickly going to become a problem in the industry. So I think, we definitely want to be out there saying, this could be the next thing in air traffic management, right? It could replace or supplement heavily in the interim period air traffic management, or at least enable air traffic controllers to focus more on the art of control and less about the kind of administration and dealing with other events that occur. But over time, you're right. I think you go right to what I said at the start. That U for us isn't about unmanned, it's about unification. And if you go further enough forward in time, then I think there is a good case to be made for handing over more responsibility for air traffic management to a system that can ultimately always act in the same way and always act in a secure manner.
Well, I think I've said it before. I worked at the Scottish Air Traffic Control Centre 30 years ago when they filled a room full of computers to rule the world and take over and do everything and to replace a system of paper strips in a room, an enormous room. There was an enormous room, and all it had was paper strips with their aircraft coming across the Atlantic. The rollout of the computers took longer than they thought, so they didn't have time to run the two systems together because they'd booked the builders to demolish the previous building with all the strips. They had it running for a week and it all fell over. So, but that wouldn't happen now. I should imagine the computing power available at the time in that room is probably similar to the computing power in my smartphone now. So I can imagine massive redundant. They also had yeah, that's another. The next story was they used to have to make if you got powerful enough, you got a corner office, and they had too many managers. They made more corners. But anyway, that's another thing. Well, yeah, well, we have turned it into an Altitude Angel chat. Let's try and swing it away just for a moment and bring it back. I'm sure. What were we going to swing? What were we going to talk about, Bruce? I've completely. Oh, Griff 2. That's right, Griff 2. Did we see people? The only all-metal drone built to aircraft standards. I find that quite a claim.
Yeah, I find it very interesting. Yeah, the interesting thing about that is that they've built the state-of-the-art metal drone. Now, tell me, what is the aviation industry doing? They're moving away from metal to composites, carbon fiber, and all sorts of things. The Airbus is all carbon fiber and also. And these guys are going back in time to build a metal drone, which is state of the art. I think they are about 15 years behind the times, aren't they? I mean, why would you do that? The strength-to-weight ratio of carbon fiber, for example, is vastly superior to aluminium and steel. So it seems to me like we need a point of distinction. I know, let's make a metal drone. And then they've done the 3D rendering, the press releases, and got some stuff machined up and said, look, we will rule the world. So, yeah, I don't see much in that myself.
Yeah, I thought it was weird, but good. I'm glad I'm not the only person. The other thing that I found interesting that came out in the stories this last week was Hanergy, a Chinese company, extolling the virtues of their solar panels. But their solar panels are actually Alta Devices solar panels, because they bought Alta Devices, and AeroVironment originally put them on the Puma and had the Puma flying all day, and they completely abandoned that program as soon as the Chinese bought into Alta Devices. And I see some other folks are standing that up. We're seeing Puma having solar panels again with American-made ones. But it's interesting, the security implications and things like that of military companies jumping away. I just found that interesting. But they're still touting how good their solar panels are. Had me interested anyway. I need to get out more, don't I?
Are interesting. You get a third of, even at 25%, which is what they're claiming, you get 1/3 of a horsepower per square meter in full sunlight. That's not a lot of energy.
Well, it's very hard to lift 1/3 of a horse. That's the thing. I mean, it's going to be far better than trying to lift 1/3 of a horse.
Will it lift the metal drone? That's what I want to know.
No, I don't. The sparks may
say, if you read the press release, it says, despite its metal construction, it's very light.
Yes. Are there any other things we could use that would be light and strong? I wonder. Yeah, that is. And I suppose it has the same conductive properties as carbon fiber. Also, you give yourself radio problems and things like that.
Well, the next big thing will be, we're making our drone from a cellulose composite, so it's environmentally friendly. It's trees impregnated with resin, which is actually really, really strong. But we are saving the planet by doing so. This is our eco drone, and they'll get the press releases, and the media will go crazy, and it'll be gone in 2 weeks.
That's been and gone, hasn't it? It was that airdrop thing was made out of cardboard. That's and some of the seed dropping things, which I've been trying to get those people to come on, because I do think the forestry use case is quite a good use case, and I like the idea. And but they won't come on and talk about it. None of them will come on and talk about it. So it does make you wonder if they've gone any further than the renderings, really. It's not there's 4 companies trying to do it, and not one of them come on. They keep bubbling up. One of them keeps having a press release and telling us it's the next thing and getting on some big news channel, but they won't come and talk to Bruce. That's not good. Bruce, have you seen anything this week in your travels that has caught your fancy?
Just that drone dive on the airliner, and I looked at that and I thought, obviously that if that is real, and there's still some speculation that it may be CGI, it may not actually be real, although because the ground looks a lot like the ground map from Grand Tour or Grand Theft Auto or something. There's people trying to debunk it by saying, oh, no, this lighting's wrong, that's lighting wrong. I don't know if it's real or not. But obviously, even if it's not real, the person who posted that must have been dropped on the head as a child, because really they're quite stupid. A lot of the talk has been, oh, this is going to really damage the hobby, the non-DJI, the actual real hobby drone racing type thing. But I'm thinking, no, because the story here is drone misses airliner again. And the thing we have, it's equivalent of, that plane was on an approach path to an airport, right? So that's like a motorway, like a freeway. And someone walked out with their drone into the middle of the freeway. Now, obviously, we don't say, oh, someone walked out onto a freeway. We must ban people from walking, ban pedestrians. No, you say, you've just got an idiot here who's done something really stupid. He's already broken all the regulations there are covering that thing. So we don't need to tighten regulations. We just need to tighten enforcement. So it's really one of those exception cases which proves why we need the regulation. And it doesn't reflect on anyone else except the person that actually did it.
Yeah, I have it on quite good authority that for all the people that are going with the fake viewpoint, that the chap actually live streamed several flights coming in to his folks. So if he was faking it, he did a very, very, very good job of it. Indeed.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when I first saw that video, I thought, this is horrific. What? This is so dangerous. Who on earth would build a subdivision under a flight path? How many aircraft fall into suburban areas and kill people every year? Well, that's the biggest risk factor of that whole thing, is flying large aircraft filled with jet fuel over all those houses. I mean, my goodness, that would be silly if you said to someone, we're going to build your house, we're going to put you in jeopardy of an airliner falling on you. I mean, people initially you think that's a bit of an unreasonable risk, but it's a risk we live with, because as Richard says, you can't eliminate risk. You can only manage it. You can only mitigate it to a certain degree. And we take this trade-off of convenience versus risk every day when we jump in our cars. The thing is, whenever drones are mentioned, oh, we've got to eliminate the risk, ban the drones, register the pilots, people go overboard. They haven't yet established, they're not comfortable with the idea of drones have a level of risk. We've got to learn to make sure that level of risk is balanced against the benefits they bring us. And to most people, drones aren't bringing any benefits. They don't have a drone. They're not flying around in drones. They're not benefiting from drones. So they want zero risk. But as drones become an increasingly a part of our everyday life, like cars are, they'll start to accept the fact that, well, it's great. I just called up Amazon 15 minutes later. They delivered me a pizza. I don't know why, but I got a pizza in the backyard here. So this drone is doing work for me. I'm happy to have these drones flying over my house. Otherwise, I would starve. That's when people start to take a more sensible look at the risks involved.
Yeah, well, you guys had that incident just across the bay from yourself there in Melbourne, didn't you? Where the aircraft, I can't remember whatever it was, but it hit some shops that had been built at the end of the runway. Which is, yes, it's madness. And luckily, it was early in the morning, and I don't think anybody in the shops were injured. Well, because there wasn't anybody there, but there were certainly people in the aeroplane, and they passed away. But yeah, so. Yeah, no, I get your point. And manned aviation does really need to raise its game a little bit. And I speak that as the driver of drivey aeroplane fly things. It does need to lift its game. And in the comments talking about firefighting tanker airplanes, yeah, they're definitely coming, and they're coming in many ways. There's a really groovy Spanish airdrop job from the back of Hercules, and then they're repurposing crop dusters to do it. That is a really good use case of flying. As Richard said, the Canon K-Max is that's an amazeballs machine. So stuff is coming, and and to speak to Bruce's point, really, when you're something has saved you, rescued you, or done something really positive for you, and it happens more frequently, you're going to end up with a much better opinion of unmanned aircraft. That's for certain, for absolute certain. Oh, John will read comments now. Now, what else are we going to talk about? Go ahead.
I was just waxing lyrical in there about responding to one of the comments on the will we see tanker airplanes replacing firefighting UAVs anytime soon? And I just talked about the K-Max, but I actually saw a demo in Syracuse in New York I think it was a couple of years ago now, pretty much run by Lockheed Martin, but they had a bunch of their unmanned vehicles there, everything from the very small quadcopter that would go out and just do a little bit of a survey to a passenger carrying aircraft, which I can't remember the name of, but I want to say it was called Linda or something like that. But they tried to do this awesome scenario and a fantastic demo, and they set fire to a bit of runway, and then we had to wait a long time for someone to, tell this autonomous drone where to go. And it came, it went over to the lake, and it filled up the firefighter's bucket. It was massively impressive, and you could tell this vehicle was clearly flying itself. It'd been pre-programmed, obviously, but it was so stable in the air. And then it lined up and it flew down the runway, and it identified the fire, and you could see all the location information on the screens, and it dropped all the water and missed the bloody fire. And it was the most disappointing demo you could have ever seen, because the demo just ended there. And it kind of killed the whole autonomous, part of the demo. And it was obviously a pre-scripted thing. But I think, the way these companies are going, there are really obvious advantages. And the last part of that demo was they had this, I think they call it an optionally piloted helicopter. But this thing flew in and landed, and you see the guy that was standing there as part of the demo, and he's I think he looked at it and thought, I'm not going to get in this just yet. I don't think I want to get into it. But kind of landed to show that he could have had enough time to get in, and then it flew away. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Until people see real benefit from these machines, then the risk is essentially infinite in most people's minds, because they can't see any reward. But I think that's why those humanitarian use cases for drones make a lot of sense, because people really want to see how those things could change lives. And if you see a bunch of drones going out and shaving in half or reducing by 90% the amount of time it takes to find a vulnerable missing person in the Scottish Highlands, then you're saving lives, and you're doing that incredibly cheaply. And that is an incredibly powerful story, I think.
It's going to be hard, again, referring to your map in the background, to make those use cases. I know they want to have perhaps some blood transfusion flights or organ donor flights, isn't it, in London? I know that's part of the CAA sort of wish list of trials to get it happening right in the centre of London, which would be amazing, and that would perhaps make a difference, coming from inside to out and all those other good things. But I'm afraid all I see when I see that map is I just see Lord Sugar and The Apprentice flying around in his helicopter, because that's just about where all that is on H1 and H4 and all that along
this is all digitized now, don't you? And it's on our maps. This is just a relic. It's a relic. You can go online and all the heli routes are there.
No. You have to have a map. You have to have a map. You can't.
Why have you got the London heli routes? You're in South Africa. No.
I know.
There's only one air chart in the whole world.
Yeah, there is. Oh, I've flown those heli routes, and they're pretty mad. They're pretty
mad. Do you see the news about the Royal flights as well in the UK? The Royal flights are now going to be published by NOTAM. And in the past, there was this whole security consideration where they wouldn't publish the exact flight paths and the exact times, and it was security versus safety, and they're very much swinging in the order of safety now, and the actual waypoints and the departure and the takeoff points are all going to be published by NOTAM. And of course, if you have your favorite service in the world for processing NOTAMs, it's going to draw an enormous circle over the UK, which is the outer radius of the flight. But we're just about to ship a feature which will take the interior details, the actual detailed waypoints, and publish those as well. So you'll see those on the maps as well soon.
And is it still, as it used to be, a sort of a moving airway in effect, where it starts and stops and rolls back behind them as they fly, or has that changed?
that doesn't go into that level of detail. So the whole kind of temporal, what did they used to call it? It was the purple corridor or something.
Yeah,
purple air, whatever, purple airspace.
Yeah.
But you know, that I think is being simplified in favor of this mechanism. I seem to have lost everyone.
Yeah, there we are. We're back.
Oh, you're there.
We're back in the room. Yeah.
That wasn't just me then.
No. It was Bruce's fault. Just blame Bruce. It's important.
Just blame me.
Seriously,
actually,
dude, what are you doing?
Did you see in the Daily Mail this morning, and I had to read the Daily Mail because the sun wasn't working, the Oracle of all things news, they're claiming that there's massive congestion being caused by online shopping due to the number of white vans delivering product. So I'm thinking this benefit that we're looking forward to win the public over to unmanned vehicles may be this drone delivery thing, because suddenly the freeways and motorways will be freed up because all these white vans will be no longer required. We'll have drones dropping all the stuff off. If that happens, the public will go, yay for drones. Now I can drive to work in less than 3 hours.
I'm just going to respond to Greg first. You're absolutely right. Blame YouTube, but at least we can do this for free from New Zealand, the UK, and South Africa, which is amazing. But it is still important in all things to blame Bruce. I was thinking you mentioned the delivery vans, Bruce, and then I was also thinking, well, when we land in our flying whatever, and we only get to a point near enough, we're going to need that Uber there as well. So you are perhaps going to have to that unified system coordinate delivery drops onto the white. There's still going to have to be last 100-meter vans or whatever, and your Ubers. So I guess it is a potentially a huge digitally enabled vehicle management system that you might end up having.
Right, you just created a whole new acronym there.
Well, I'd say you probably in the industry can't exist until we've had 30 acronyms or something like that. So
we should just go through them all now so that we can get to the point where we have an industry.
You know, once you've used up all the 3-letter ones, once you had to go to 4 letters, then you're really getting advanced.
You see, you did know, Bruce. You did know there was a secret, and it's the 4-letter secret. So does an industry start after 4 letters then?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of 4-letter acronyms in industry.
I know, yeah.
They're all the same regardless of the industry.
Yes, that's right.
But TLAs are just so much better.
TLAs are where it's at. Yeah. So have you guys been following what the likes of DHL and FedEx and all those guys are looking at using drones for in the States, particularly the States?
Yeah, I think we have. Do you think that's actually going to work?
I quite like it to work, and I think DHL and FedEx and all the big shipping companies would love it to work, because I think, you know, we again, I think it's Bruce's point, but translated to cargo, instead of having people being dropped point to point, in other words, which is killing the whole kind of idea of having an Amazon parcel delivered from a delivery depot to your back garden. I think that's going to be, there's so many challenges associated with that anyway, but equally, that would be quite an antisocial thing, wouldn't it, to be having this, you know, ginormous Amazon drone hovering in your back garden. But I quite like the whole kind of DHL, I'm giving those guys undue credit, but the delivery service mechanism where they actually use light aircraft predominantly to fly between, you know, distribution hubs in the US. You know, if you've got an aircraft which has got a payload capacity of 300 or 400 kilograms, and you're devoting 100, 150 kilograms to a pilot and some life support, then clearly that's a significant proportion of your cargo. So actually helping to reduce that, I think industry will be pushing the use of unmanned drones, and they're typically flying over non-congested airspace anyway, right? In quite sparse environments.
You're back to your OPV term, your optionally piloted vehicle, and that's exactly what it is. And then, you know, my favorite system, the Alias system from Aurora Flight Sciences, sit the robot in the seat of an aircraft. You're also recycling. You're recycling as well. It's a very green thing to do. Sit that robot in there, let it drive, and then, because a lot of people are reinventing the wheel with these cargo drones and aircraft. This is helicopters and Cessna caravans that already do it, as you say, day in, day out. They do it. Just remove the pilot. You know.
So it reminds me of the inflatable autopilot in the Airplane movie.
Absolutely, absolutely. Don't make me tell my inflatable joke. Did I do that on air once? I did, didn't I? But let's not do that.
I'm not sure you're allowed anymore.
No.
So is the new SpaceX launch, is that the ultimate drone delivery of a car?
Well, there you go. Well, nicely played. Nicely played, Mr. Simpson. It is really, and it's also fantastic marketing experience, isn't it? We need that person in charge of marketing, because it was full of all the Douglas Adams stuff. They're full of all the sci-fi references in everything they do, and it works. It worked magnificently.
There's negative in everything here, right? I mean, what about all those poor souls that are on the waiting list for a brand new Tesla, and they just shot one into space?
It was a 2008 one, second hand. It's an old one, but I want to know: is the glove box bigger on the inside than the outside?
Oh. Very good. Greg saying, what's the retail price of those drones? What do you mean, the caravans and stuff like that? Well, they're going to be in the millions of dollars, but the advantage that they have is you're not certifying a brand new aircraft. There are people all around the world that know how to fix them. If you leave them as an OPV, there's people that know how to drive them. So I'm trying to run up a thing based in Lesotho, the idea that we simulate it, and there are airfields there that if the weather was bad, you really wouldn't want to be flying, and they are flying medical supplies in there day in, day out, and people really are. The SpaceX one, oh yeah, well, gajillions, but they're putting their lives on the line. Why? You don't need to do that anymore. We don't need to do that. It should be that should be an optionally piloted vehicle. So if it's got somebody that needs to be taken to medical care, then it probably is best to put a driver in there as well. But the driver needn't drive much. If there's a really accomplished computer on board, you can just watch that doing its thing. But if they're delivering not so urgent medical supplies in dodgy weather, then perhaps just let the robot do it. I think, but I mean, how many use cases are there like that around the world? I wonder. Not many, I shouldn't think.
How long before we see completely autonomous military fighter aircraft and things? How long before we take the pilot out of the seat of that? That's got to be the area where I'm sure there's a lot of money being spent right now, because as long as you got meat in the suit, you're limited to 9 or 10 Gs, and you're at a tactical disadvantage. Get rid of the wetware, and you've suddenly got a far more practical war machine.
With air, aren't they? And it's already happening, and they're operating in collaboration with. Again, pull up a sandbag. Back in the day, we were a Hawk Squadron, and we used to cooperate with the Phantoms. Used to go high and be the radar. We used to stay in the weeds and pop up to the targets that the Phantoms had identified. So the Hawk Squadron job's out the way now. Staying hanging off the wing is the autonomous aircraft that's being dispatched to go and do its job by whatever, the big guys.
Once again, Syrians lead the way on the attack on Russia.
I think we need to be blaming Bruce here for taking us out of the wonderful fluffy land of humanitarian use cases for drones into battle-hardened, weaponized drone systems. But what's this? Vacon 6644 says, do you think we will see small drones weaponized to be used FPV in combat zones? I think he raises a very good point here, that the youth of today, the youth, YOOF, could actually repurpose their video game skills. I agree maybe with the first part. I think we'll see that happening, but the latter part scares the living daylights out of me, because these guys will do it just for the lols, and we don't want that kind of untraining folks walking around with these systems. But there are lots of companies developing.
It happens. But it's
there was isn't there an Israeli system, a backpacked Israeli system, which has a little thing and the guy puts a thing on it. It's like a guided missile by man. It can fly around and then over the bank and into the whatever. It's already done.
The AeroVironment Switchblade's just the same. It's tube launched. It folds its wings out, and it does exactly the same. So
we're on YouTube, right, on the internet, and that allows us to be conspiracy theorists now. So we can probably just what makes you think they haven't been doing this for years anyway? What makes you think?
But if you mention anything to do with war, you won't be able to monetize this video.
What is it good for?
Exactly.
Not monetizing your videos.
Last Starfighter. Well, sadly, it's all out there, and as you say, I mean, it was the primary purpose of this whole industry. So it's it's very, very tricky, isn't it? But I do think, hopefully, just try and get it back to the fluffy rabbits. Right, fluffy rabbits driving humanitarian aircraft. A fluffy rabbit, perhaps a kitten. Kittens
flying. So those are the optional pilots, are they? Fluffy rabbits.
Yeah. Because what better when receiving your medicine than a kitten to give you that medicine. I mean, that's got to be the way forward, hasn't
You
it?
get to keep the kitten as well, because apparently stroking kittens. There's an article a couple of years back in the paper, probably a pointless newspaper, but it said stroking a kitten lowers your blood pressure. And I think some other newspaper in the UK suggested the NHS give out kittens.
Well, there's an obvious thing I should say to that, but I'm not going to, because that'll obviously also lose any monetization. But anyway, I think, look, it's 8 minutes past the hour, and we had dear viewer, if you want to have a look at Altitude Angel and other UTMs are available with this crowd, and I'm in reverse because I can't make the app work probably, but Gutma, they're sort of a crowd and Know the Enemy and all that sort of other UTMs are available.
So Gutma's not the enemy, right? I'm a board member.
No. I know you are. I know you are.
They're the global association, but they don't make anything.
What about EMAP? I looked at it on the weekend. Oh God, it's terrible. It showed some other drones in operation, but each of them was anonymous. There was no information. If you wanted to get hold of the person, there's no way to do it. There's no follow up. It's like it's fluff.
But why would you want to get hold of the person, Bruce?
Well, if you were planning to do a flight in that area, a manned aircraft, you might want to contact them to find out where they're operating, so that you can get assurance that you're not going to bang into them. Or if there's a number of reasons you might want to contact these people. Yeah.
Well, but doesn't it bring us all the way back to where we started with Richard? That the system should be, because people are going to worry about privacy in that sort of sense. So the system should be keeping you apart, and you don't really need to know. If it's near your airfield and it happens frequently, then maybe you get to know the person by another means. But yeah, I can see why anonymizing the data would be a good idea.
But there's no communication. If you've got a smartphone, you've got an app, why can't you message that person if you've got a question anonymously if necessary? But at least have a communication chain between the two parties that may be at some stage sharing airspace.
I think you raise some good points there. I think there are definitely entities in this space that care more about data and privacy, and those that care less about it and monetizing. Taking the kind of Google approach to everything, which is monetizing you, making you the product. But I think there is an element of what a UTM company has to do, which is to satisfy safety requirements, and those safety requirements are regulated requirements. And they should be met according to whatever those regulations are in the country you're offering that service. And I think there's a real maturity that you'll see evolve over the next 12 to 18 months between companies like AAA, but AirMap and Unifly and bunches of others. Those that can create solutions that recognize those challenges and solve those regulatory challenges, and those that are just looking to productize UTM. And I think that's that's one of the ways in which we try to differentiate overall. But then again, for us as well, we have to look at the whole thing end to end. It's very easy as a UTM company to look at your computer and say, well, this is where I live. This is what we do. We do drones and we do software. But actually, at least 50% of what we do on a daily basis is to interface with existing ATM systems. And we got some pretty exciting announcements I can't make yet, but they'll be made in February. In time for the World ATM Congress in Madrid, will kind of cement how that, our thinking around this and how that's going to work. But I think you raised some really good points about data security and privacy and compliance.
And then, Gutma, I've taken it. This is the group that is making sure there's going to be some sort of standard between all you different, because it's no good if you have 10 companies and they each have their own way of doing things. There's going to be one standard to rule them all, surely, in the end, and hopefully an open standard. Maybe you can unpack that sort of way of thinking a little bit.
Well, I think, I'll put my cynical hat on. I'll tell you what, I'll put my Bruce hat on, and then I'll put my Altitude Angel optimistic founder hat on. And I say, actually, I'm going to side with Bruce on the pessimistic side of things a little bit here, because actually IT in general, or technical standards in general, there isn't really a great international technical standard, right? And if you look in aviation for data exchange, yes, there's SWIM, and yes, there's AIXM, but it's like that old adage in IT. When you go to an IT company, say, hey, what's the process you guys use to develop software? And someone will say, oh, we do Scrum. But so actually, they're changing the process for them. And actually, you see this in standards all the time. We use asterisk 61 or whatever it's going to be, but we've added this field, or but we've done this thing. So I think you're always going to see these local differences. And the promise of GUTMA is global technical standards. And I think it's a challenging mission. But GUTMA's already released its very first international standard called the Flight Declaration Protocol. But getting adoption of that today, when there's no regulatory requirement for companies to do it, even other companies that are members of GUTMA are struggling to find a compelling reason to do that. Whereas, a company, Altitude Angel, for example, we think it's very simple. We think from a safety perspective, if you want to call yourself a UTM service provider, you need to take safety seriously. It's not an add-on. It's not something you do when the regulator says, oh, what about safety? You need to lead with this in your conversations. And put very simply, there is nothing that stops, for example, Altitude Angel and competitor A managing drone flights on behalf of its customers in exactly the same geographical region at exactly the same time. But the problem there is, if we have two of those companies doing that in the same region at the same time, both of us have half a picture of the airspace, and therefore we're both failing our customers at that point, in my personal view. Now, GUTMA have the standard to actually solve that problem, protecting everyone's personal data, sharing the safety information, but getting traction is really hard without a kick up the arse from the regulators to make those companies do it, because most companies are out to make a quick buck or make a product and get it in front of you, not to be in it for 25, 35, 45 years for the future of air transport and safety. And I think that's where GUTMA is going to be changing, hopefully for the better over the next couple of years.
Top answer, because you've kind of had the system enforced on you over there, Bruce, in a little way, but it's only a trial area, I think, isn't it? Is it the whole of New Zealand, or is it?
No, well, they're covering the whole of New Zealand, but there was one specific area down Queenstown where they were basically encouraging people to use it and so forth. But as I pointed out in the previous webcast, it doesn't do NOTAMs. It's really ineffective. It's a patting at it. It's basically saying, we're here, look at us. Yeah, we'll sort it out later. But they're trying to get that leg in the door. They're thinning into the wedge. We've got a presence. We've made an established contact with the regulator, so we'll build on that. But I'd rather see someone come along with a product that was actually useful before they start entering the old boys network and doing the smoozing, and they're just lacking in so many areas. It's not a tool that anyone I know is going to use.
Well, I was trying to say a little while ago, 7 or 8 minutes ago, we said we should stop. That if you want to have a look, dear viewer, at Altitude Angel and what it could do, if you look at SOS News and click the drone safety map, you can have a look and scroll in, wait for the day to arrive, and you can play around and you can see the information that they have. You can sort of, if you join up a little bit further, you can file a flight plan, as it were, with them and that sort of thing. If you're a user of ArduPilot and you use Mission Planner, all that information will arrive for you on Mission Planner, and it's all going to cost you zero nothing nicks, which is a fantastic price to pay for all that information. So I'm a fan, and I have to show my bias. But on television, they always say other UTMs are available. So I have to say other UTMs are available. So that's what I was trying to say earlier. But it's
if
worth
you join
it.
Now, Richard will send you 5 steak knives. Our operators are waiting.
Really?
Please call this
But
number.
wait, there's more. Yeah. Actually, that's an interesting point, because you've interjected with the Altitude Angel bit. All I'm going to say there is, yes, you're out there, you're doing, you're promoting Drone Safety Map, and we're really pleased that we were able to get you a copy of the map you can embed in your system. But you have already taken the first step at deploying your own entry point into a UTM, and the benefit that you get to that is, whatever those regulations are, wherever they change and whenever they do it, anyone who's using your version of the map will automatically inherit the latest data. If some new system is invented that replaces the NOTAM system, for example, our system will take care of that for you and push that to you. So that you're getting it. You are paying a fantastic price of 0 for probably. I'm doing a Carlsberg advert here. Probably the most accurate data anywhere in the world. And that for us is really key. And that's one of our key principles around accuracy. You can't be safe if you're not accurate. You can't be accurate if you're not up to date.
Well, I was very happy that in Queenstown, just north of Queenstown, there was a NOTAM for a fire, and it was where that tourist got into trouble. And it wasn't on the chosen app provider or the current experimental app provider, who said that New Zealand New Zealand did funny. Well, they probably did, and again, we can blame Bruce because he's actually in New Zealand, so Bruce probably does do funny things with their NOTAMs. But it was plainly rubbish. NOTAM is probably one of the most archaic ways of sending aviation data there is. It's probably not changed much since the 70s or 50s or 60s.
Was it on ours? Did you say?
It was on Altitude Angel, so it wasn't on this other one, and I was quickly able to say, "Oh, I wonder if it's on." Look, you can click on this map on SES News. No, look, there it is. so it's not impossible. And so, having poor aviation data, you might as well have no aviation data at all. It's crazy. You have to have the latest. Again, I'm
bad
too many
data is worse than no data.
That's it. That's the phrase I was looking.
Absolutely right. And actually, the hardest thing, one of the things we actually have in our terms of service for our corporate customers is that they must be able to have a mechanism in their solution that tells their users when they have lost their connection to Altitude Angel, because the absence of data in your version of the app doesn't mean there is no data in that area to give you. And that for us is a massively important point, and it's a tripping point for a lot of the people we engage with initially. But that reputation to us at being able to give the most authoritative data, especially to our corporate customers, is so important that we insist that they make their users aware when they themselves have lost their connection and can no longer refresh the data. So I think it's incumbent on everyone that's going to use this data to make sure they use it properly, but also that they know when they're not getting the latest data. And we have a second restriction as well, just as an interesting point, that by default, you can't cache the data we give you for more than 5 minutes, which is, everyone goes, oh, this is crazy. I'm on a mobile phone device. I need to be able to conserve bandwidth. Well, we've done a lot to actually reduce the bandwidth requirements anyway. But actually, what good is it to you pre-downloading the airspace information for the next 7 days, where that's fine for static information, but where are you going to get your NOTAMs from? Where are you going to get other transient scheduled activations and deactivations? So you've got to have that connection to pick up the things that you can't plan for, and that's what we try and plan for.
Just for interest, in your simulations, how many times does it all go wrong and everything hits each other?
It depends. So we can create that scenario. We can create the doomsday scenarios, and we often do because we need to stress test things. And I'm a big advocate for simulations, because I think if you're going to do big crash simulations, you want to do that in a virtual environment, not in a real environment. I think everyone would probably agree with that. But I think, in the early days of the algorithms, I think we were having something around a 70-odd% success rate, which is not a great success rate, right? I think you'd argue the term success in the use of the term success rate. But, we have different criteria for what we deem a success as well. So, there are scenarios. I think if there are any sci-fi fans out there, you would have been familiar with something called the Kobayashi Maru in Star Trek, which is all about an impossible scenario that Kirk cheats on the test to win, but it should be an impossible scenario. We have simulation scenarios which are essentially zero sum. No one is going to win here, and the algorithm should foul. But the point is, does it foul precisely how we predict it's going to foul? So predictability is another aspect that we're always looking at, and sometimes it's one I said to you, come back to me and ask me about AI.
Yeah. I was trying
this is the AI discussion is happening right now.
You see what I was trying to do?
A lot of you get a lot of buzzwords in almost any industry, but we went through big data, went through analytics, and then it was all, let's go to the cloud is going to change lives, and it's always happened. And now you've got everyone talks about cybersecurity because that's a thing now. It's got its own term, but it's always been a thing. And then AI, and actually you're getting companies that are saying we do AI drones, and it's like, okay, that's great. And blockchain's the other one as well. Are you using blockchain at Altitude Angel? We get a lot. And actually, yes, we do use blockchain, but not in the ways that some people are marketing their use of it. But AI is all about creating a system which can think for itself and act for itself, that you do not have to program to operate in a specific way. In other words, that is the very antithesis of what an air traffic controller would want to happen in the airspace. Because if you have a system which has total control over the airspace and it doesn't act in a way that you can predict, what are you actually expecting this system to do? It's, air traffic controllers are human beings. They're autonomous individuals, but they follow rules, and they follow those rules for a very, very good reason. They keep people alive. What you don't want is an autonomous system doing whatever it thinks is the most appropriate thing in what's called a non-deterministic and an evolutionary way. And from our perspective, we're thinking about the regulations. We would have to get such a system certified for use. How can you possibly get a system certified for use if you cannot describe end to end how it behaves? And I think that's the key challenge for us with looking at things like AI. We can use AI in testing to simulate where drones might be, but we can't use AI algorithms or AI technology in our air traffic control situations because it is non-deterministic. It is not certifiable in our view.
So there's no plans to change the name from Altitude Angel to Skynet then?
No, not yet. Maybe sometime in the future.
It's going to be very interesting to see how all this rolls out. I hope it doesn't roll up model aircraft flyers and youngsters and things like that. I think certain groups. I know you don't. You're defensive of the older industry, as it were, Richard, especially as you have such old drones behind you. So that must mean that. Well, you protect it. You protect. I know you protect the idea of.
This is my drone. I built this one. 8 years ago, something like that.
You see, that's what I thought. But I know you're for the hobbyists. You're up for the hobbyists and that sort of thing, and the youngsters, and you're not there to. I think a lot of people seem to want to just get it. The easiest way of getting rid of a problem or some of the airspace problems, which might be 10-year-old boys with their model airplanes, is to cut them out, just ban them. And I know you're not like that.
No, I mean. The way we've always set out to think about it is we have one sky, right? Everyone has one sky. And the way the regulator views the sky, certainly in the UK, is the sky is a common good. It's there for the enjoyment and the benefit of everyone. And some of those people can go into the sky and fly around, and some of those people can't, but they still like to enjoy the sky. So from my perspective, why do we want to restrict people from using it? Everything we're doing here is about giving regulators the comfort they need to let more people into it. That's what we're trying to do, right? And I think it would be a travesty if we suddenly removed model aircrafters, or we removed 10-year-old kids who are, let's face it, if I don't have kids, but if I had a 10-year-old kid that was saying to me, "Daddy, show me how to build a drone, I want to go fly," I'd be ecstatic. I'd be wanting to show them about the stuff. They learn about aerodynamics, they learn about electrical engineering, safety, all this other stuff. Why take away a precious utility and a precious resource from those folks? So this is all about encouraging it and making it done right. And what really brings a tear to my eyes when we talk about the commercialization of airspace. And you see that, it's kind of happening in the US with the whole Lance system. Let's carve out the airspace. Let's sell it. Let's okay, fine. Maybe have some kind of service tier mechanism, but do we really, really want to be going down this route? And I think most of Europe's kind of looking at Lance thinking, maybe this isn't for us. Maybe we don't want to.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I do hope you're right. I hope that's a little bit of insider traded knowledge there, because it's interesting. If they're going to do it, then they've got to charge manned aircraft because a manned aircraft will go across the town. It will go through all those little blocks of areas. Well, why can't he also attract a charge for every single? Because that is where that's going. That is where that's going, even though they're saying it's all free and no, it's not.
The airlines pay for the
yes, they do. They do,
right?
Yes.
So those guys are looking to try and drop costs. But then again, if you go and talk to the airline folks, they're wondering why on earth in today's modern industry, why the ANSP that's incumbent in the country they're currently flying over has to have some element of a charge paid to them, when actually budget airlines like folks like Ryanair and EasyJet would quite happily operate in a model where they get to choose the ANSP that does their transatlantic navigation. So these guys are in a situation where they're thinking, hang on a second, why am I paying here for worse service than I get over here? Why can't I choose the provider that's going to give me the best value for money? And I kind of agree with that approach, and I would quite like to see kind of service tiers in the airspace. I think that makes sense. If you're a commercial operator, you're going to make lots of money from using the airspace, then yes, if you want to do something that's complex and requires certification, then you should probably pay. And in fact, you do pay today, because you have to pay to get your permit for commercial operations or your equivalent around the world. But is it in the gift of a government or a regulator to give one company or two companies or three companies the power to sell access to the airspace? In my personal opinion, the answer is no. And that's the difference, I think, in business models that is probably a subject for a different podcast, not your general SUAS news podcast, which we should talk more about drones in general.
And rabbits, flying them.
Rabbits and KMAX and all these other cool things. But we haven't had lots of audience questions today, Gary. Where's the audience?
I think they've been watching rockets. That's what they've been doing, which was amazing. That was amazing. Bruce, come on, you must say something about their airspace and things like that. You've had big thoughts on that.
I seldom consider it. No, it is a public resource. There is. Everyone should have a right unless there's a reason not to. That's my philosophy on access to public spaces. I mean, no one actually owns it, do they? So you have to have a good case to stop someone using it, and that's usually a case based on safety. So yeah, I think at the moment we're just going through that phase with unmanned aviation, like the red flag before the horseless carriage. It'll all settle down over time. We'll look back in 10 years and go, my goodness, what was all the fuss about? Trouble is, we're going to have to endure this period of change, and nobody over the age of 15 likes change. And most of the regulators and bureaucrats, they're old, they've got shawls on their knees and they've got slippers and things. They are probably the least, enamored of change. So we just have to deal with it and just keep pushing. And human nature is like that. But ultimately, a change is inexorable. You cannot resist it. It does happen. And, as I say, it's just the future is arriving one day at a time. We'll get there eventually.
We will. It's true. And that's probably a very good point to end this at a half an hour over time. Terrible timekeeping. Terrible.
Over time?
Half an hour over time. We talked too much Altitude Angel. That worked very well. I didn't mean to do that, but we did. But thank you for answering all our silly questions and very well and putting me to shame. And we must do it again. Let's do it again soon, especially when you have whatever this new news is. It's after midnight here, so I can say I'm going to get us out ahead. Bolton was one of the cities that won. Anyway, but it's not after midnight in England, is it?
I don't know what just happened, but I think I have to embargo this information in my head somehow. I don't. The Nesta Flying High stuff, right? It's going to be fun.
Yes.
It's going to be more.
Yes. Allegedly, Bolton was one of the cities that won.
You should have just said, I put my money on Bolton. That's my prediction.
I should have said, if I was a betting man, I'd put I've gone wrong again. Yeah, so well done, Ian Hudson. Well done, Bolton. You didn't tell me. I found out in other ways. So that's going to be announced on tomorrow morning, I believe, the cities that won, and I'm sure Richard actually knows who they are, because I'm sure every single one of them is going to be using Altitude Angel in one way or another. I hope they are. If they're not, then why not? Then they should fail. So,
do you want a job? We're hiring.
Was that too partisan? No, we've created the data. Why go to another service provider might spring up that's much better, but they're not there yet. So you might as well use that one at the moment. So that's cool. Well, I better say, do you have anything else, Bruce, before we go?
No, the only thing I'm working on at the moment is the sub 250 gram photography camera drone. Yeah, that's going to be a project that I hope will make the sky safer.
You should make it out of metal because it's very light.
Yeah. Good idea. Actually, I've carved it out of stone, the age-old material.
Granite, the most aerodynamic material.
Granite, so tough, so strong, so very, very strong,
very durable.
But it'll be aerospace granite, not regular granite, not your kitchen cut tabletop. It'll be special aerospace grade.
Anvil drone, yes, I bet. I'm already seeing the 3D renderings. We'll get fire at the rendering farm, Bruce. Get it going.
Yeah.
And
I have it poised here, ready to go.
There you go. Yeah, and I mean sub 250. Of course, there's rumors of the Mavic 2 coming. There's this, that, and all the others. And DJI still haven't quite managed to pack it super small yet. There can only be 1 or 2 iterations away, I'm sure. But sub
Richard hasn't paid the Powerball. Look,
yeah, it's definitely where it's at. So we'll look forward to seeing that. Oh, did Ron get his views?
Yes, he did in the end. So you can stop watching his channel now.
I'll stop watching. Yeah, I'll unsubscribe immediately.
Yeah.
No, I'm enjoying his channel. Yeah, it's much better than who's that codger in the orange hat that's often in his videos.
I've no idea. We've tried to get rid of him, but he hangs around like a bad smell.
Yeah, exactly. He's a load of trouble, that bloke. Anyway, look, we're talking nonsense here. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, guys.
Bruce noted at the top that I was supposed to have moved on Sunday. I'll tell you the story now. On Sunday, I was up at the new house and pumped water from the dam, and a friend of mine said a while ago, "Oh, that's going to blow up eventually, all that pipe work." And I started the pump, and I thought about him saying that, and I looked at it, and it all blew up in front of me. So I fixed that Sunday into Monday, and was it this morning? It's like it was this morning. I started up. Oh, what a good boy I am! Pumping the water up into the big tank. You probably have in New Zealand. In fact, you do, don't you? You have to have a certain amount of water on your plot there. And I put more water in the tank that's ever been there before. Bottom of the tank burst. so that's why I haven't moved.
Can't you get water shipped up from Cape Town? Don't they have an excess of water in Cape Town right now? They can deliver that by truck, can't they?
There's lots of scandals going on with that. Lots of trucking companies allegedly delivering water and not, and all sorts of things. But yeah, and that's a really good drone use case there, is sorting out the waterways, getting rid of non-indigenous plants along the side, blue gums, flipping Australians, sending their trees here, and the wattle, get rid of all of that, and that would sort that problem out in a go. But our regulations don't allow that. This is a very long wrap up, isn't it? Dear viewer, join us again 2100 GMT next week, same time, same back channel. Richard's having a disco. It's time to go because the disco's starting there.
Eco buildings, they just keep turning the lights off. It's terrible.
Flashing away. The music started in Richard's head, so it's time to go.
Party time.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks, dear viewer. Do join us next week. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.